Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a subject that literally causes more sweaty palms and racing heartbeats than almost anything out there. Yep, we're talking about math. But hey, here's the secret we're going to uncover today. Being good at math isn't some magical innate talent you're just randomly born with. No way. It's a highly structured, entirely learnable process. In this explainer, we're pulling together the absolute best insights from top academic and educational sources to give you a definitive, practical blueprint for mastering mathematics.
Right off the bat, let's look at this quote from Albert Einstein. He once said, "Do not worry about your difficulties in mathematics. I assure you that mine are greater." I just love starting with this because it instantly humanizes the whole struggle, you know? If you ever find yourself frustrated, zoning out in class, or just totally paralyzed by a blank piece of paper, well, you're in incredibly good company. The friction you're feeling isn't a sign that you can't do it. It's honestly just a natural part of the learning journey.
But when that friction turns into actual fear, it triggers what experts call the cycle of failure in math anxiety. And as you'll see, it totally feeds on itself. It usually ticks off with a negative experience, like a bad test score or maybe feeling embarrassed at the whiteboard. That quickly leads to math avoidance. You know the drill. You stop studying, you stop asking questions, and, well, that avoidance directly causes poor preparation, which then practically guarantees poor performance on the next test, fueling yet another negative experience. Today, our main goal is to break this exact cycle.
So, to break that cycle, here's our 6-step game plan. We'll cover overcoming math anxiety, mastering foundational skills, using deliberate practice, the 4-step solving method, time management and routines, and wrap up with some essential free resources. Let's get right into it.
Step 1. Overcoming math anxiety.
Before we even touch a calculator, we've got to dismantle the psychological barriers blocking our way. So let's just absolutely bust the biggest myth in education right now, the idea of the mathematical brain. The reality, according to the experts, is that learning math is exactly like learning a foreign language. Seriously, think about it. The mathematical symbols and notation, those are basically just the rules of grammar. The terminology is your vocabulary. Doing your homework is really just practicing the conversation. You aren't born fluent in French or Japanese, right? Well, you aren't born fluent in calculus either. It takes years of practice and continuous use.
Okay, so how do we actively reduce the anxiety that stops us from practicing that language? Here are some actionable, straight from the expert steps. First, use stress management and deep breathing the second you feel those physical symptoms of panic creeping in. Second, you have to actively fight negative thinking. When your brain tells you, "I've just never been good at math," you literally need to overwrite that with an affirmation like, "I am prepared and I can learn this." Visualize yourself succeeding, kind of like an athlete before a big game. And this is absolutely crucial. Focus on understanding the why instead of just memorizing rules. When you're stressed out, short-term memory is the very first thing to vanish. If you actually understand the underlying logic, you won't need to rely on sheer panicked memorization.
Step 2. Mastering foundational math skills.
Look, you just cannot build a solid house on a shaky foundation. A massive consensus across student forums and teaching resources points to one main thing. When students fail calculus, they actually aren't failing calculus. They're failing the underlying algebra and trigonometry. You absolutely have to prioritize those foundational skills. You need a rock-solid grasp of basic functions and their graphs. Like you should know instantly what an x-squared parabola or an e to the x curve looks like. Being proficient in algebraic manipulation, stuff like factoring and dealing with fractions, is pretty much the non-negotiable bedrock of all advanced math.
Step 3. Using deliberate practice strategies.
So, knowing what to study is one thing, but how do we actually lock it into our brains for good? Enter deliberate practice. This is a highly structured, evidence-based learning process. When you're faced with a complex problem, you don't just stare at it hoping for inspiration. You break it down into manageable little sub-processes. You develop your skills by carefully analyzing worked examples and using something called interleaving, which basically means mixing up the types of problems you solve so your brain gets really good at identifying which strategy to use on the fly. As one learner brilliantly put it, math is like playing chess. Reading books about chess moves is cool and all, but you'll never be a good player until you actually have hundreds of games under your belt.
This whole progression of practice is captured perfectly by Bloom's taxonomy. Notice how your cognitive skills kind of have to evolve. You start at the top with basic knowledge, just stating a theorem or memorizing a formula. Then you move down into comprehension and application, like actually calculating a slope. But the real mastery, the ultimate goal of deliberate practice, is hitting synthesis and evaluation. This is where you aren't just following steps anymore. You're reading a complex word problem, deciding which formulas apply, setting up the equations yourself, and evaluating the whole thing. It's like putting together a giant puzzle, and it requires deep, deliberate effort.
Step 4.
The four-step solving method.
Okay, so how does this apply when you are actually staring down an intimidating problem on a test? Think of this four-step solving method as your absolute go-to emergency protocol when you get stuck. Step 1, read carefully. Seriously, don't rush. Figure out exactly what type of problem it is. Step 2, develop a plan. Don't just start furiously writing numbers. Jot down your organized steps and pick the formulas you'll need. Step 3, solve the problem meticulously, sticking to that exact sequence you just planned. And Step 4, review. Did you cross-check your final answer against a quick estimate to see if it even makes logical sense?
Read, plan, solve, review. Having this clean, circular framework memorized is incredibly powerful. Because when exam panic inevitably sets in and your mind just goes totally blank, you don't even need to remember the specific math right away. You just need to remember to fall back on this reliable four-step process.
Step 5, time management and routines.
Now, obviously, none of these amazing practice strategies are going to work if we don't actually sit down to do them, right? So we're going to use the psychology-based study loop to build habits that totally beat procrastination. Building a habit requires a loop. First, choose a fixed daily time for math. Second, set up a cue, maybe a sticky note on your laptop or a specific alarm on your phone that says, go time. Third, you absolutely must have a distraction-free environment. And fourth, actually don't skip this one, give yourself a small reward after you accomplish your goal. Repeating this simple loop literally wires your brain to make studying math an automatic, sustainable habit.
Let's talk about what you actually do during that study time. For starters, you should try to solve every homework problem, not just the easy ones. And when you make a mistake, don't just erase it and move on. Analyze the error. Why did it happen? Also, ask your teacher questions early. Don't wait until the night before the exam. But you want to know the absolute gold standard here? Find a study buddy and teach the concepts to them. Research consistently shows that explaining a math concept out loud to someone else is hands down the single most effective way to lock it into your own brain permanently.
And when test day finally arrives, time management is everything. The sources highly recommend scanning over the entire test first, just to gauge its length. Start with the problems you definitely know. That immediately builds your confidence and secures some guaranteed points. Next, you have to work strictly by the clock. Think about it. If you have a 50-minute test worth 100 points, that means you roughly have 5 minutes for a 10-point question. If you hit that 5-minute mark on a really tough problem and you're stuck, just move on. Seriously, do not drain 20 minutes on one hard problem and leave a bunch of easy points totally blank at the end.
Finally, Step 6, essential free math resources.
All right, so you've got the mindset, the foundational goals, the practice strategies, and the study routines. Now let's gear you up with the tools. These are the absolute top resources consistently crowdsourced and celebrated by learners everywhere. Khan Academy is fantastic if you need a highly structured curriculum from basic arithmetic all the way up. If you want deep conceptual explanations that feel exactly like sitting in a real college classroom, Professor Leonard on YouTube is universally praised. For brilliant written-out examples and cheat sheets, Paul's online math notes is a literal lifesaver. And if you just need to grind through practice problems and watch them get solved step by step, the Organic Chemistry Tutor on YouTube is unmatched.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground today. Everything from dismantling anxiety to mastering deliberate practice and building those unbreakable study loops. Mathematics really is just a language, and you now have the ultimate blueprint to become fluent. But, you know, a blueprint is completely useless if you don't actually start building. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to chew on. What is the very first step you'll take today to rebuild your math foundation? Don't wait for tomorrow. Pick just one thing from this explainer, break that cycle of failure, and start building. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep learning.